The night was quiet in the alien village. 2 moons floated in the black sky, one glowing silver and the other red. The people of the village sat in silence. Their stomachs were empty. Their crops had died. The food machines, built long ago by their ancestors, were broken. No one knew how to fix them. Hunger was everywhere. Mothers held their children close. The children's eyes were wide, not because of fear, but because of weakness. They were too hungry to cry. The elders whispered, in low voices, saying the end was near. The village would not last another season. Then suddenly a bright light cut across the sky. It was fast, like a burning star falling from the heavens. The villagers gasped. Some dropped to their knees and prayed to the old spirits. Others ran, outside their homes, pointing at the streak of fire. The light grew larger. It roared louder and louder until the ground itself shook. Trees bent, dust rose, and animals scattered into the dark forest. The villagers held each other, waiting for the crash. And then it came. Boom! The ground shook like thunder. A wave of light and smoke rolled through the valley. The crash was so close that stones rolled down from the mountains. For a moment, no one spoke. Only silence remained, broken by the sound of crackling fire far away. The chief of the village stood up slowly. His eyes were sharp, but his face was tired. "We must go," he said. His voice was rough but strong. "If it is danger, we face it together. If it is hope, we must see." Torches were lit. A line of villagers walked into the night, their shadows long and shaky under the moonlight. The forest was alive with strange sounds, but the people did not turn back. Step by step, they followed the trail of broken trees and burning soil. Finally, they reached the place of the crash. A giant crater opened before them, its edges glowing with heat. Smoke rose into the sky, and the smell of metal filled the air. In the center of the crater lay something strange, something none of them had ever seen. It was not a rock and not a star. It was a pod, made of metal and wires, cracked open like a broken shell. The villagers whispered among themselves. "What is it? Is it a weapon? Is it a gift from the gods?" The chief raised his hand for silence. Slowly, carefully, he walked closer to the pod. The heat burned his skin, but he did not stop. He looked inside and froze. There was a boy. A human boy. He was lying still, his eyes closed, his body weak. His clothes were torn and his hands were covered in black dust. Around him were pieces of strange junk, broken metal parts, wires, plastic scraps, small tools. It looked like the boy had fallen to this world together with trash from another place. The chief's heart beat fast. Never in his long life had he seen a creature like this. The boy's skin was pale, his hair short, his face unlike any being of their kind. The villagers gathered around the crater. Fear filled their voices. "Kill it before it wakes," one shouted. "No, it may be dangerous," another cried. "What if it is sent by the stars to save us?" whispered an old woman. The boy stirred. His lips moved, a soft sound escaping. Words, in a language no one knew. His eyes opened for a second, blue like the sky before storm. Then he fainted again. The villagers stepped back in fear, but the chief raised his hand. "He is not a weapon. He is not an enemy. Look at him. He is only a child." The people looked again. The boy's body was thin, and his face looked more tired than dangerous. The chief felt something inside his heart. Perhaps this boy had come for a reason. Perhaps this was no accident. "Take him," the chief ordered. "Do not harm him. Bring him to the village." The villagers hesitated, but they obeyed. Carefully, they lifted the boy from the crater. He was light, weaker than they expected. His hand twitched, as if he was dreaming. As they walked back to the village, the moons shone brighter. Some villagers whispered that the boy was a curse. Others whispered that he was a blessing, but no one knew the truth. That night, the alien village carried a strange human child through the forest. None of them could guess how much he would change their lives. None of them could see that this small, weak boy would bring hope where there was none. Far above, the stars watched in silence. The story of survival, invention, and courage was about to begin. The boy opened his eyes. At first, he saw only shadows. The roof above him was made of stone and wood, curved like the shell of a great beast. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls. The air smelled of smoke and herbs. His body hurt. His head throbbed. He tried to sit up, but his arms were weak. Around him, soft whispers filled the air. He turned his head slowly. Dozens of eyes stared back at him. The villagers stood in a circle. Their skin glowed faintly under the torchlight, blue, green, and gold shades. Their eyes were wide and bright, too large for their faces. Their hands had 3 fingers, long and sharp. Some wore robes woven from leaves, while others wore armor of bones and shells. The boy's heart pounded. He had never seen creatures like these before. His mouth opened, but only a dry whisper came out. Water. The villagers stepped back in fear. The sound of his voice was strange to them. None of them understood his word. The chief stepped forward. His tall body was wrapped in a red cloak, his staff heavy with carved stones. His voice was deep, steady. He speaks, but his tongue is not ours. The boy tried again, raising his shaking hand. He pointed at his mouth and whispered again, Water, please. The chief frowned. He turned to the others. Some shook their heads, but one young alien woman stepped forward. Her eyes were soft, glowing silver in the light. She carried a clay bowl and knelt beside the boy. Slowly, carefully, she lifted the bowl to his lips. Cool water touched his tongue. The boy drank greedily, coughing but refusing to stop. His chest burned, but life returned to his body. The villagers gasped. Some looked fearful, others angry. Why help it? One elder hissed. It is not one of us, another argued. It fell from the sky with fire. Perhaps it is a demon. The chief raised his staff and silence fell. No, we will not kill a child who cannot fight. We will watch him. We will judge later. The boy looked at them, not understanding the words but sensing the tension. His eyes moved from face to face. Some looked at him with hatred, others with curiosity, but none with trust. He wanted to speak, to tell them he was not an enemy, but his words were broken by fear. All he could do was raise his hands slowly, palms open, showing he had no weapon. The young alien woman who gave him water nodded. She seemed to understand his gesture. She pointed at herself and said softly, Lyra. The boy blinked. Her voice was calm, gentle. He pointed weakly at his chest and whispered, Ethan. A ripple of murmurs spread among the villagers. They did not know his tongue, but they understood what he was doing. A name. A beginning. The chief studied him for a long time. Then he spoke to the people. He is not like us. He is weak. But he may know things we do not. We will give him a chance. The villagers were not pleased. Their stomachs were empty, their hearts heavy with despair. To feed a stranger while their own children starved felt like madness, yet no one dared disobey the chief. That night, Ethan sat near the fire in silence. He touched the scraps of broken metal and plastic that had been brought from the crater. They were sharp, twisted, useless. But to him, they were familiar. They reminded him of Earth, of home. He remembered how, back on Earth, he had built toys, tools, even small machines from trash. His father had laughed and called him the junk genius. Now in this strange world he had nothing, no family, no tools, no hope of going home, only junk. The fire crackled. The villagers whispered in their own tongue. Some pointed at him, their faces filled with anger. Others avoided looking at him at all. Only Lyra, the silver-eyed woman, stayed close. She gave him a small piece of dry root to chew. It was bitter, but his empty stomach welcomed it. Ethan closed his eyes. He could still hear the voices of his mother and father in his memory. He felt tears sting his eyes, but he wiped them away quickly. He could not show weakness. Not here. The chief approached him once more. He pointed at the broken scraps near Ethan, and then at the empty food storages in the corner of the hut. His meaning was clear, even without words. Can you help us? Can you fix what is broken? Ethan did not answer at first. His mind was tired, but something inside him stirred. Maybe, just maybe, the junk around him was not useless. Maybe, just maybe, he could help. The villagers watched him closely. He was a stranger, a human boy from another world. Some saw him as hope. Others saw him as danger. But one thing was certain. His arrival had changed everything, and in the dark silence of the alien night, as the two moons shone above, Ethan whispered to himself a promise. I will survive. I will find a way. And maybe I will help them too. The village woke with the sound of empty stomachs. Morning came slowly, with pale light falling over cracked fields and broken machines. The villagers moved like shadows, weak and tired. Children sat silently near the huts, too hungry to play. Elders leaned on sticks, their faces thin and hollow. Ethan watched all of this with wide eyes. He sat near the fire, clutching the small piece of cloth Lyra had given him as a blanket. He felt stronger after drinking water, but he could see how weak the villagers were. Hunger was not just in their bodies, it was in their hearts. The chief walked through the center of the village. His steps were slow, but full of authority. One by one, the villagers gathered. Ethan followed, curious. He could not understand their words, but he could read their faces. Sadness, anger, fear. The chief raised his staff and spoke. His voice was low but firm, echoing in the silent air. The people replied with shouts. Some pointed at the broken food machines lying near the fields. Others pointed at the empty storages. Some pointed at Ethan. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He did not understand the words, but he knew what they were saying. He is an outsider. He is eating our food. Why should we trust him? The crowd grew louder. A woman lifted her child, thin as a branch. Tears rolled down her face as she cried out, in desperation. Ethan could not hear the words, but the meaning was clear. If we cannot feed our own children, why feed him? Lyra stood between Ethan and the crowd. Her silver eyes flashed. She shouted at the villagers, her voice sharp and fearless. But even she could not silence them. The sound of anger rose higher, like a storm about to break. The chief slammed his staff against the ground. The noise cut through the crowd like thunder. Silence returned. He spoke again, slow and heavy. Ethan watched his face and realized the chief was making a decision. The chief turned his gaze to Ethan. His eyes were not filled with hate, but with challenge. He pointed to the food machines, then to the fields, and finally, at Ethan. His meaning was clear. If you stay, you must help. If you cannot help, you are of no use to us. Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to shout, I don't know how, I'm just a boy. But something inside him pushed back. He remembered his father's words back on Earth. Even in the darkest place, you can make something shine. Use what you have. The crowd slowly dispersed, though their eyes remained cold on him. Ethan sat near the broken machines later, staring at the rusted metal. They were strange and alien, far more complex than anything he had ever seen. Their wires glowed faintly, but the core was dead. He touched one of the machines gently. The surface was cracked, the pieces twisted. He whispered to himself, how can I fix this? I don't even understand it. Behind him, Lyra approached quietly. She sat beside him, her expression softer than the others. She handed him a small piece of fruit, dry, bitter, but food. Ethan took it with shaking hands. Thank you, he said, though he knew she did not understand his words. She smiled faintly, then pointed to the broken machine. She touched her chest, then pointed at him as if asking, Can you? Ethan sighed. He shook his head, then spread his hands helplessly. I don't know. But even as he said the words, his mind was working. His eyes moved from the broken machine to the piles of junk scattered around the village. Broken pots, rusted wires, plastic scraps from his pod, junk everywhere. And in that moment, a small spark lit inside him. He remembered the little inventions he had built back home. Water filters from bottles, toy fans from broken batteries, a cooking stove from tin cans. His father had called it magic from trash. Maybe, just maybe. He picked up a bent wire and twisted it between his fingers. The texture felt familiar. His mind began to turn. The day passed slowly. The villagers worked in silence, pulling dead crops from the fields. Ethan watched them, his heart heavy. The children's faces haunted him the most. They were too thin, their eyes too tired. He remembered the nights when he and his family on Earth had gone without food. He remembered his mother crying softly, thinking he did not hear. He could not let these children suffer the same way. That night, when the moons rose again, Ethan sat alone by the fire. He held scraps of junk in his hands, twisting, bending, shaping. The villagers watched from a distance, whispering. Some laughed, thinking he was playing. Others shook their heads, calling him useless. But Ethan did not stop. He could not stop. The chief stood in the shadows, watching with sharp eyes. Lyra stayed closer, quietly handing Ethan more scraps whenever he needed them. She did not understand what he was building, but she believed in him. The fire burned low and the night grew colder. Ethan's hands were cut and bruised, but he kept working. Slowly, piece by piece, something began to form. Not a machine, not yet. But the beginning of an idea. And in the silence of the hungry village, hope began to whisper again. The night was long, but Ethan did not sleep. His mind was restless. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the alien children. Thin, hungry, waiting for something that never came. He remembered how his own little sister back on Earth had once cried for food, and how he had tried to cheer her up with small toys he built from trash. Now, in this alien village, the pain felt the same. Different world, different people, but the same hunger. Ethan sat near the dying fire, turning scraps of metal and plastic in his hands. He bent them, twisted them, tested how they fit together. To the villagers, it looked like the boy was simply playing. To Ethan, it was something else. It was the beginning of a plan. When the first light of morning touched the sky, Ethan walked toward the broken food machine. The villagers stopped what they were doing and stared. He climbed on top of the wrecked metal box and tapped it gently, listening to the echo. The villagers murmured. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. The chief stepped forward, his staff in hand. His deep voice rumbled. Ethan could not understand the words, but he knew the meaning. "What are you doing, boy?" Ethan crouched down and picked up a seed from the ground. He held it high for all to see, then pointed at the soil. He pressed the seed into the dirt and patted it. Then he pointed at the broken machine, and finally at himself. The villagers watched in silence. Ethan's hands moved quickly now. He picked up wires, plastic shards, and a bent panel from his pod. He began connecting them, making strange shapes. The villagers frowned. One man shouted angrily, pointing at Ethan's pile of junk. His voice was sharp. "Trash cannot feed us." But Lyra stepped forward. She placed her hand on her chest and then pointed at Ethan. Her voice was firm. Hope begins small. The crowd fell silent. For hours, Ethan worked. He broke the larger scraps into smaller pieces. He tied wires with vines, melted plastic with the fire, and hammered metal with stones. His hands were cut and dirty, but his eyes shone with determination. The children crept closer, their eyes wide with curiosity. They whispered to each other, giggling softly as they watched him shape the trash into strange devices. Some villagers still looked doubtful, but they did not stop him. By nightfall, Ethan had built the first part of his invention. It was a rough frame made of bent metal and wood, like the skeleton of a strange animal. Pipes connected to a hollow, drum. A broken fan blade spun weakly at the top. It looked ugly, fragile, almost useless. But Ethan smiled at it, his heart racing. To him, it was beautiful, not because it was finished, but because it was a beginning. The chief approached, his face unreadable. He studied the strange frame for a long time. Then he looked at Ethan. His eyes narrowed as if asking, "Can this really save us?" Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead. He placed his hand on his chest and whispered, "Trust me." The chief did not understand the words, but he understood the boy's eyes. He gave a slow nod and stepped back. That night, Ethan lay on the ground staring at the stars. He thought of Earth, of his family, of the nights when hunger had nearly broken them. He thought of his father's words. Even junk can become gold if you use it right. He whispered to himself, "I will do it. I will help them. I have to." The next morning, Ethan began again. This time, some villagers brought him more scraps. Broken pots, bent tools, twisted wires. Lyra came with a basket of old parts no one had touched for years. She placed them beside him and smiled. For the first time, Ethan felt he was not alone. Days passed. The strange machine grew piece by piece. Ethan built a rotating arm that could dig small holes in the soil. He added pipes that could drip water evenly, powered by heat from the sun. He created a simple filter using cloth and sand to clean dirty water. The villagers gathered every evening to watch. They whispered to each other, some amazed, others still doubtful. But the children laughed when the fan blades spun in the wind, and their laughter was like music in the starving village. One evening, the chief stood before the people and raised his staff. His voice was strong. "The boy builds from trash. Perhaps trash is not the end, but the beginning." The villagers bowed their heads. For the first time in many months, hope stirred like a sleeping fire. Ethan sat beside his half-finished machine, his hands bleeding from work. He looked at the green seeds in his pocket, the last seeds the villagers still had. They were tiny, fragile, but full of life. He whispered to them as if they could hear him, "You will grow. I will make you grow." And as the two moons rose high in the sky, shining over the broken land, Ethan's strange invention stood tall in the center of the village. It was not yet alive, but it was waiting for the spark that would change everything. The village was silent the next morning, but not because of fear. It was silent because everyone was watching Ethan. He worked in the center of the village, surrounded by piles of broken scraps. His hands moved quickly, though they shook with exhaustion. His eyes were sharp, fixed on every piece of metal, every wire, every bit of plastic. To the villagers, it looked like madness. To Ethan, it was hope. He hammered old pipes into shape. He bent wires into circles. He tied pieces of cloth into filters. Smoke rose from the fire as he melted sharp scraps into new forms. He worked as if the entire world depended on his invention. And in truth, it did. The children sat close, whispering in excitement. They had never seen anyone build like this. Their eyes followed every move he made. The elders stood farther back, arms crossed, doubtful but unable to look away. Lyra stayed beside him, handing him tools and scraps. Sometimes she brought water, sometimes food. Her silver eyes shone with quiet trust. She did not know what he was making, but she believed he was making something important. The chief stood in the shadows, silent, watching every detail. Hours passed. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead and stepped back. The first part of his machine was complete. It was a strange-looking thing, like a mix of broken cart and water pump. At its center was a drum that could spin, powered by a fan blade above. Pipes stretched outward, and a small filter sat at the base. It was rough, ugly, but alive. The villagers gasped. Some laughed nervously. Others muttered, "This cannot save us." Ethan ignored them. He reached for the basket of seeds, the last seeds the village still had. He held them in his hands for a moment, staring at them as if they were treasure. His heart pounded. If this failed, the seeds would be wasted, and the village would lose its last hope. He whispered to himself, "Don't fail me." Carefully, he placed the seeds into the machine's soil bed. He poured in water, then pulled a lever he had built from sticks and gears. The machine groaned, the fan blade creaked, and then, slowly, the pipes began to drip. Drops of clean water fell into the soil. The crowd gasped again. For a moment, nothing happened. The soil remained dark, the seeds hidden. The villagers shook their heads. Some began to walk away. One man shouted angrily, "It is useless, he wastes our time." Ethan's chest tightened. His hands shook. What if they were right? What if this was all just trash, nothing more? But Lyra touched his shoulder gently. She shook her head, her eyes calm. Her voice was soft but strong. "Wait." So they waited. The minutes crawled by. The crowd murmured, restless, doubtful. But then, something stirred. A small green sprout broke the soil. Tiny, fragile, but alive. The villagers froze. Their eyes widened. Another sprout appeared, then another. The soil seemed to breathe, as if life itself had returned. Children screamed with joy. Mothers cried. Elders fell to their knees. For the first time in years, new life was growing in their dead land. Ethan's heart leaped. His machine worked. The seeds were alive. The villagers rushed forward, touching the sprouts gently, whispering prayers. They looked at Ethan with wide eyes, not with hate, not with doubt, but with awe. "He has done it," one whispered. "The boy from the stars," another said. "He makes life from trash." But the chief did not celebrate yet. His eyes were sharp, his voice deep. "This is only the beginning," he said. "One sprout does not feed a village. Can your machine grow enough for all?" Ethan swallowed hard. He knew the chief was right. A few sprouts would not stop starvation. He had to build more, bigger, stronger. That night, Ethan worked again. His hands were bleeding, his body weak, but he did not stop. The villagers no longer mocked him. Instead, they brought him more scraps, more broken pieces, more junk. For the first time, the village worked together with him. The pile of trash became treasure. Old pots became containers. Rusted wires became connections. Broken glass became lenses for sunlight. Even the smallest scraps found a purpose. Days turned into nights, and nights into days. Ethan barely slept. His machine grew larger, louder, stronger. Water dripped steadily, soil turned rich, and sprouts multiplied. The villagers began to smile again. Children laughed and ran among the growing plants. Mothers fed their little ones with the first leaves. Elders watched in wonder, whispering that the spirits had sent the boy for a reason. But Ethan knew it was not spirits. It was hard work. It was hope. It was turning trash into life. Still, doubt haunted him. What if the machine broke? What if the soil failed? What if all of this was only a temporary miracle? He looked up at the twin moons one night, his body aching. He whispered to the stars, "Don't let me fail them. Not now." The machine whirred softly behind him, its fans spinning in the wind. The fields glowed faintly under moonlight, alive with sprouts. The impossible was happening, but in the distance, far beyond the forest, another light moved across the sky. Not a star, not a moon, something else. Watching, waiting. The village had found hope, but danger was not far away. Morning sunlight poured over the village, warm and golden. But this time, it did not fall on empty soil. It fell on green. Rows of sprouts covered the field, small but alive. Their leaves reached for the light, fresh drops of water shining on them. The air smelled of life again, not just smoke and dust. For the first time in many seasons, the land looked alive. The villagers gathered around, their eyes wide. Some touched the sprouts carefully, afraid they might vanish if handled too roughly. Mothers bent low, showing the tiny plants to their children. Elders stood silent, tears glistening in their eyes. Ethan watched from the side, his body tired but his heart burning with pride. His invention stood tall in the center of the field, whirring softly. Pipes dripped water. The fan spun in the wind. The machine was ugly, built from trash, but it was working. A young child ran to Ethan and tugged at his sleeve. The child pointed at the sprouts and laughed, a sound the village had not heard in years. Ethan smiled. He knelt down and ruffled the child's hair. "It's only the beginning," he whispered, though the child could not understand his words. Lyra approached with a basket in her hands. She bent down, plucked one of the larger leaves, and placed it inside. Then she handed it to the chief. The entire village watched in silence. The chief looked at the green leaf for a long moment. His hand shook as he raised it to his lips. He chewed slowly. His eyes widened. "It is real," he said in his deep voice. The crowd erupted. Cries of joy filled the air. Villagers hugged one another. Children danced around Ethan. Mothers wept openly, clutching their little ones. The sound was no longer despair. It was celebration. Ethan's chest tightened with emotion. He felt tears in his own eyes. He looked at the chief, who raised his staff high and shouted, "The boy brings life." The villagers echoed the cry, "Life, life, life." From that day, everything changed. The villagers no longer looked at Ethan as a stranger. They looked at him as hope. Every morning they brought him scraps to use. Broken glass, old wires, rusted metal, even bones. They gave him everything, and Ethan found a way to use it all. His machine grew stronger each day. More pipes, more filters, more frames. Soon, not just one, but several fields were covered with green sprouts. The village began to eat again. First leaves, then small fruits. The children grew stronger. Their laughter filled the air once more. At night, the villagers gathered around fires, singing songs they had forgotten. Lyra taught Ethan some of their words, pointing at objects and speaking slowly until he repeated them. The boy's tongue was clumsy, but every day he learned more. He learned their word for water, for seed, for life. And slowly, he learned their word for friend. But even as joy filled the village, Ethan never forgot the danger. He knew the machine was fragile. If it broke, the village would starve again. He worked every day, repairing, improving, testing. His hands were always bruised, his clothes torn, but he did not care. The chief often watched him in silence. One evening he spoke quietly to Lyra, who translated the meaning for Ethan. "You have given us food, but food is not enough. Can your invention give us a future?" Ethan did not answer right away. He looked at the machine, at the fields, at the villagers laughing under the twin moons. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "If I can build more. If I can teach them." The days turned brighter, the nights more peaceful. The machine fed the land and the land fed the people. The village was alive again, but in the shadows of the forest not everyone celebrated. Strange eyes watched from the darkness, glowing faintly. Shapes moved among the trees, silent but alert. One night, Ethan woke suddenly. He thought he heard a sound, something like metal clashing in the distance. He sat up, heart racing, and stared at the stars above. For a moment, he thought he saw a light moving across the sky. Not a star, not a moon. Something else. He shook his head, forcing the thought away. He turned and saw the villagers sleeping peacefully, full for the first time in many years. He lay back down, whispering to himself, "They're safe now. That's what matters." But deep inside, he felt unease. The next morning, the harvest began. The villagers pulled fresh fruits and roots from the soil. They cooked meals together, filling the air with smells Ethan had never known before. They shared food with him, pressing warm bread-like roots into his hands, urging him to eat. He did, and his heart felt fuller than his stomach ever could. That evening, the entire village gathered for a feast. Fires burned high, songs echoed through the night. Children danced around Ethan, calling his name in their tongue. The chief lifted his staff and declared that the boy was no longer a stranger. "He is one of us," the chief said. "He is family." The villagers cheered. Lyra smiled at Ethan, her silver eyes shining brighter than the firelight. Ethan smiled back, his heart swelling with belonging. For the first time since his crash, he felt not lost, but home. Yet far above, in the endless black sky, that strange light moved again. Closer this time. Brighter. Watching. Waiting. The miracle harvest had saved the village. But it had also drawn attention. And not all attention was kind. The night sky glittered above the alien village. Twin moons cast their silver and red glow over the fields that now shone with life. The sound of laughter and music filled the air. For the first time in many years, the people of the village were not afraid of tomorrow. Ethan sat by the fire, surrounded by smiling faces. Children danced around him, chanting his name in their tongue. Mothers pressed food into his hands, insisting he eat more. Elders touched his shoulders, their eyes filled with gratitude. The chief rose from his place and raised his staff high. His deep voice echoed across the gathering. "Tonight we celebrate life. Tonight we honor the boy who came from the stars." The crowd cheered. "Ethan! Ethan! Ethan!" Ethan's cheeks turned red, but he smiled. For so long he had felt like a lost child, a stranger in a strange world. But tonight, he felt something new. Belonging. Family. Lyra stepped forward. Her silver eyes sparkled as she placed a garland of woven leaves around Ethan's neck. She spoke softly, words he was only beginning to understand. "Brother. Friend." Ethan whispered back, his tongue clumsy, but his meaning clear. "Family." The villagers cheered louder, their voices rising to the heavens. But while the village celebrated, the chief's eyes lifted to the horizon. His gaze lingered on the dark forest and the endless sky. His face was calm, but his mind was heavy. He had lived long enough to know that blessings often attracted dangers. Later, as the fire burned low and the villagers sang their final songs, Ethan slipped away from the crowd. He walked to the edge of the fields, staring up at the stars. The night was peaceful, yet something in his chest felt unsettled. Then he saw it again. A light, not a star, not a moon. A moving light, drifting slowly across the black sky. His breath caught. His heart raced. Could it be another crash, like his own? Could it be a ship searching for him, or something far worse? He whispered to himself, "They found me." Behind him, Lyra appeared quietly. She followed his gaze, her silver eyes narrowing at the moving light. She said nothing, but her hand brushed his arm. He could feel her unspoken words. "You are not alone anymore." The next morning, Ethan returned to work. His machine whirred steadily, feeding the fields. But now he was not the only one building. The villagers had begun to copy his methods. They shaped small devices from scraps, creating tools for farming and water collection. Ethan taught them with gestures and broken words, and they learned quickly. The village was no longer waiting for miracles. They were building their own future. The chief watched all of this with quiet pride. He knew their survival no longer rested on luck. It rested on knowledge, and on the boy who had given it to them. That evening, the chief stood beside Ethan. His voice was low, but filled with respect. "You are no longer a stranger. You are one of us. This village is your home." Ethan nodded. His throat felt tight, but his heart was full. "Home," he whispered. The villagers cheered once more. For the first time in many years, the future did not look empty. It looked bright. But as the days passed, that strange light in the sky grew larger, closer. One night, Ethan awoke to a deep rumble. The ground shook softly, as if something massive had entered the sky above. He rushed outside. The villagers were already gathered, pointing upward in fear. The light was no longer far away. It was near. A ship. Huge, dark, and silent. Gliding across the sky like a predator. Its shadow swallowed the moons. Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew it was not from this village. It was not friendly. The villagers panicked. Some shouted. Others prayed. The chief raised his staff, trying to calm them, but even his voice shook. Ethan stood frozen. His mind raced. If this was a rescue ship from Earth, why did it feel so wrong? If it was something else, what did they want with him, or with this village? Lyra grabbed his hand. Her silver eyes were fierce. She spoke quickly, pointing at the machine, then at the fields, then at him. Her meaning was clear. What you built saved us. What you build next must protect us. Ethan looked at her, then at the villagers huddled together. Fear gripped them, but so did trust. They were looking at him, not as a stranger, not as a burden, but as their hope. His hands trembled. He was only a boy, but he was the boy who had turned trash into food. The boy who had saved them once, and now he would have to save them again. He lifted his chin, staring at the massive ship above. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady as he whispered to himself, I saved them once. I can do it again. The villagers gathered closer, their eyes on him. The chief raised his staff, in silent agreement. Lyra squeezed his hand. The ship in the sky glowed brighter, its shadow growing across the land. The celebration of harvest was over. A new challenge had begun. But this time Ethan was not alone. He had a family. He had a village. He had a world, worth fighting for, and the boy who built hope from trash was ready to build again.